Well, let's go up another story on something that I mentioned a while back about the complex ultimately consuming the simple. You've had at least several weeks. Let me throw in the juicier part. Now, before I do that, let me point out, in one person's lifetime, if all you're doing is operating by ordinary intelligence, this can certainly seem to be less than a law. It could, at a quite physical level, at the most physical level, down at the level of motor talk, you could have a situation wherein it would appear to be just the opposite, in fact. Let us say you had a man who was... Before I give you the example, I'll go ahead and give you the kicker, make the example more fun. The complex is going to ultimately consume the simple via talk. Now that is the part that I am going to try to get you to see tonight, that is the super dressing on the whole notion. And the almost side step I was about to take, I was going to point out, in one person's lifetime, if you're operating by old intelligence, you're operating on the basis that daily life, the time of daily life, is one's conception of life. And it is so slow, it is so personalized, and it's so limited that this law that I have pointed out already, that the complex will consume the simple via words, can appear in one person's lifetime to be just the opposite. And the example I was going to make, how about this? Someone very involved with talk, someone very involved with cortical talk. Let us say it's a man who is an anthropologist, has his PhD in anthropologizing. Graduates, maybe writes a little paper, appears on a few talk shows, bundles up his family. Maybe he does his original research, maybe not a lot of field research, but on ideas of less primitive people. He comes up with some new twist enough to get himself a PhD after his name. So he takes his family and he goes to the island of Squadalupe somewhere. And he has written about these people second-handedly. Secondary sources, but anyway, he goes there. Now here's a man that you would say would be driven, if we're going to look at the three areas of possible talk, he is being driven by cortical talk. He goes there, and there are the Squadalupians. And he lands, he meets them, he tries to tell them, well, I guess he'd already know how to speak the language a little, what little language they had, and he tells them, I'm an expert on you people. I got my PhD on you people. And they invite him over to the big hut, him and his family, and that night they kill him and his family, and they eat him. It could happen. Well, hell, it could happen in Sacramento for that matter, but that would appear to fly directly in the face of me saying that ultimately the complex will consume the simple. Because and what I was giving you tonight, via words. Words didn't have anything to do with it. In this case, words did not make the difference. Just before they killed him, he may have said, no, don't do this. Or he may have said, come on, guys. He might have said something. He might have said, I'll give you $50. The thing is, you could look at it this way. Let's say that the Squadalupians were primarily driven by motor talk. Quite primitive people, perhaps the most primitive people left on this planet, which one way to look at the most primitive, or very primitive, would be those whose primary talk would be motor talk, as opposed to cortical talk or even limbic talk. So you could say that here is an instance, here is a beautiful example. I just made it up just to disprove. It just disproves everything that I started out saying by my own example. I love it. It was just right. these almost nonverbal, let's say these Guadalupeans, their vocabulary is just down to, just a handful of words, like pass the salt. Or could I have that leg if you're through with it? That they took a man and his family, but they took this man whose whole life was almost a Vedas example of cortical talk, of the supremacy of words. That was his whole life. And it didn't do him a damn bit of good. They killed him and ate him. Here, there's several things I'm going to try to get you to get a glimpse of tonight. It has to do with the language. When I say that the complex is going to ultimately consume the simple, it has to do, from any particular view at the ordinary level, of which language is at the center, or which talk of the three is at the center of your language. If it is any of the three, and that's all there is, that you are just of old world intelligence, your lifetime is too limited, it is too personal, it is too slow for you to ever see that indeed the game is, in a sense, rigged. Not in your lifetime necessarily, because my anthropologist, if I had jumped out of the bushes just as they were bringing him up to a good galloping bull, just, and I told him, if he said, aren't you the guy that said the complex would consume the simple, it's about to be otherwise. They're over there sharpening up the knives and forks for me. And I would say, yeah, but that's just your personal view. That's just your lifetime view. Other than the little humor that inadvertently came out of that last line, that is a most profitable, overlooked fact that is available only to somebody thinking in a new area. Because the way life is arranged, humans, the nervous system, is that everyone's conception of the backward and forward history of man, which in the old country I guess they'd call it the history and the destiny of man, but it's really the forward and backward history, is absolutely limited to what that person feels to be, in the widest sense of the word, that they feel to be their lifetime. So you could not take a man, I know this is a hard example, you could not take this anthropologist in his final minutes, being cooked, and for me to say, wait a minute, just because that these primitives, that is, compared to you, on a 3D level, the more simple is about to consume the more complex, literally in this case. But just because that seems that way to you does not belie the fact that I've said the complex will ultimately, even in the 3D world, consume the simple by words. Assuming he's ordinary, and if he wasn't, he's about to be ordinary. There is nothing he can do with that. It is just, it's beyond foolishness, it's beyond incorrect. It's just almost unfathomable. It's just noise. And I don't mean just because he's dying. If he got out of it in some way, he would still say, if he paid any attention to my idea, he'd say, well, that's foolish. Only by the skin of my teeth can the guy turn a phrase or not. Did I get out of that? The simple would have consumed me because I am more complex than they are. Not through some egotistical, judgmental decision, but by what I would agree to him, that yes, you are more complex. You are more complex in the 3D world. And they would have consumed you, and in your lifetime you could not see the validity, the correctness of me telling you that the complex will ultimately consume the simple. That is the nature in the 3D world of progress. That is the nature in the three-dimensional world of evolution. That is the nature of how life is growing through man in a particular way. From the limited view of one lifetime, if that's all your intelligence is open to, you could not see that the primitives, those almost nonverbal, take my squatatorians, the primitives out there and the primitives in here are doomed. They will be consumed. Now if this, not if, it hits pretty good back and forth. The first night I brought this up, and even tonight I can feel, and out on tape I can even feel it in the forward future, the forward history, that some of you get a glimpse that yes, that's true. But notice that one lifetime, you don't have to just take an example of this anthropologist. Take everybody. No matter how complex you become, you're going to die, and at the 3D level, you'll end up being consumed by microorganisms, literally. So from a one lifetime view, everybody could say that that is not true. No matter what I do, no matter how complex I become, no matter how intelligent, no matter how I might develop my artistic abilities, my physical abilities, no matter what I do, I will die and I will be eaten. I will be literally again consumed by that which is much, much more simplistic than I am. One-cell organisms will have the last word. They'll get the very last drop of me. Do you see what I was trying to point to of it going back and forth, that you can almost get a glimpse, some of you, that indeed the complex, in the widest sense of that, whatever I may mean and whatever little bit you may see by now, or whatever bit you may see, that the complex is going to consume the simple. That is the nature of all progress, from the crudest of men but finally running 4-minute miles when they thought it was impossible, to internal combustion fossil fueled engines replacing steam engines, to flying machines replacing gliders. It is all a matter of the more complex, and it is so with humans. It just does not necessarily appear to be as drastic always on a physical level, because you do not necessarily spot the physical difference between a human who is more complex and one who is less complex, that you might between the difference between a 1989 Rolls Royce and a 1909 Stanley steamer. There is not necessarily, at the level at which the motor talk would make observations, the kind of difference between an anthropologist and a squatatorian. The primitive, though, inside of each person is going to be consumed. Again, in one lifetime, the person will not necessarily benefit. The person certainly will not necessarily have any awareness, such as me pointing out with the anthropologist, or on everyone's deathbed, to tell them, hey, do you realize, don't worry, the more complex will ultimately consume the more simplistic. And everyone dying. All ordinary people say, well, that's not true because I'm about to become food for microorganisms. Consider that one partner in the dialogue is always being consumed. If not, there would be no dialogue. There would be no feeling of ambiguity. There would be no drive. There would be no reason to try and live other than at the most primitive level. And that is not the level at which people attempt to live now, even those who are most primitive still on this planet. Because now even those who are most primitive have been exposed to at least a few good things: television, tobacco, booze. And so now they strive for better stuff instead of all this homegrown stuff. You know, some Johnny Walker, if you please. Could we have some Marlboro, something with a filter tip? The primitive inside of a human is subject ultimately to being consumed. I would hope that some of you would jump a little bit ahead and realize that if you're going to do something like this, you have got to increase the tempo at which this happens. And one thing that a person needs to do is to expand your awareness beyond one lifetime. I will admit that this is, the way I'm about to put it, is fairly easy to talk about. And it should be fairly easy for you to hear, but it's also fairly easy for you to fall into some trap that this is speaking in some kind of metaphorical platitudes. And it's not. It's literally true. Anytime that apparently we go through a good dance, for instance, and I say something, apparently, I put out some kind of information, pass along some kind of information, and you take it personally, and it seems to be something extraordinary. No matter what you call it, you just realize that's the kind of thing I would have never stumbled on and probably never picked up, and it does something to my nervous system. That kind of information is outside the scope of one lifetime. That's what makes it extraordinary. Not because I thought about it, because life thought about it. But if you're based upon one lifetime, no matter whose it is, I don't care if it was the greatest person in the world, whoever you thought that was, Buddha Bubba, Billy Joe Buddha, Billy Bob Muhammad, whoever it was, if you met him or her and they said something extraordinary, or if you read that they supposedly said something extraordinary, and across this time and space you read it and it still seems to be extraordinary to you, look at it like I'm telling you, that was not the view of somebody looking at it through the eyes of one lifetime. You cannot do it. There's no way. Because anything looked at through the eyes of your lifetime is going to be flawed. It can apparently be its own opposite. It can apparently, there's all kinds of descriptions I can give you that you've heard before in various guises. It can apparently be true on this hand, and as the dreaded beast that seemed to have taken over this planet since dinosaurs left, like attorneys will say, well, on this hand, yeah, that's true, but on the other hand, and you think, my God, how will I ever figure this out? Sometimes I think yes, then again I think no. Sometimes I think I'll stay here, then again I think I'll leave. And sometimes I think all royalties to Chuck Willis. Even in another lifetime, even in one lifetime, I was going to point out, one more, if any of this didn't give you enough fits. Inside the dialogue itself you have, at any given time, a greater exposition of this, if one ever comes, I think I'll save for another night. But at the dialogue at any given time, you could look at it as one of the partners in the dance almost stops and does a couple of steps. And in a sense, right then, consumes the other partner. That's why it seems as though at any given time, if you take any notice of it, that there is one voice speaking in you. That is, you're thinking something. No. Of course, a split second later, it's as though the other voice goes, well, no. But at the time the one voice is speaking, in a sense, at the daily level, at that instant level, it's as though one of the voices has consumed the other one. Or else the other one would not have shut up. You would not have another view of it. Looked at from one lifetime, you'll never be able to see the complex consuming the simple, because besides the anthropologists and the cannibals example, and besides the worms eating you when you die and the microorganism, look at the many things in everyone's everyday life. Let us say that you put on weight just because of overeating of late. I'll say that. And you decide you want to drop some weight. Then there seems to be what? There seems to be a dialogue going on between your fat genes, your fat cells, those cells hollering out, chocolate or I'll die, which, let's call them fairly simplistic. Just trust me. Now, I know that connoisseurs may love chocolate and people with PhDs may love chocolate. But when you get down to the level that food is something of that kind of almost fanatical interest, we're talking about, will you grant me this, a fairly simplistic view as opposed to a man pondering the nature of the universe. So there seems to be a dialogue going on between these fat genes, these hungry, chocolate-loving genes, and some talking genes. Because as your talking genes, ultimately, the cortical genes have got to say, I need to drop a few pounds. Let's see. I'll just quit eating sweets for a while. I'll quit eating chocolate. In one lifetime, apparently the simplistic can again win. Not just in being ate by cannibals, not just being ate after you die by microorganisms, but by actually being eaten by things that seem to be in the areas of your interest while you are yet alive. but it's not true. If any of you have any doubt, or if any of you want another way to look a little bit further over the horizon, there would not be wired up into the life, into the nervous system of men, such things in the 3D world that appear to be conflicting, such as I want more chocolate, but on the other hand, I want to lose some weight. I got to have some sweets, but I got to lose some weight. If it were not for the fact that there was going to be one of them consume the other, why would there be? Why would life make, for what possible reason would life make people, an individual, in their lifetime, say, I want to do so-and-so, and the second later say, but I want to do so-and-so, which apparently, well, which by all observations in the 3D world is just the opposite. The two cannot coexist. Why? One of them is going to eat the other one. One of them will ultimately consume. But looked at from one view, you can make no sense of this. The closer you come to making sense of it is to think that what I've said about the complex consuming the simple is just backwards. So, at the very best, that's what you'd come up with. You call that intelligent? You knew that. Everybody knew that. So if that's true, the rest of this is a waste, all of it. But assuming it's not correct, assuming that is fatally flawed, like everything else, that is lacking in information, then do you realize that you're wired up in such a way, from a one lifetime view, that for me to say the complex consumes the simple, it can hit some neurons for a second and you can almost see it theoretically, and then everything of ordinary intelligence tells you that that's not true. It's also a part and parcel of the widespread daily belief that things are going downhill, that man's going to kill himself, man's going to kill the planet. You just can't escape from it. I don't drag out example after example anymore because surely most of you know it by now, but anything you turn on the weather report on the news, and no one even thinks about it anymore. It is such a part of the basic wiring system. They'll have a guy smiling there, should be smiling, $150,000 a year and all he is a numerologist with a suit on. Well, at any rate. And so the smiling guy, he comes on, he says, well, of course all he's going to tell you about is what's already happened. But at any rate, he says, well, the temperature right now is such and such, and the high this morning was such and such, and the sun rose at such and such, and the rain, the measurement of the rain at the official weather station here in our city today was 0.01, which makes us a good 2 inches off for the year. They always, and no, you don't notice that, but they always say it. Or the other way, which let's say in the rain today was 2.5 inches, which puts us 3.7 inches above the average rainfall for the year. It's just a constant stream of, hey, things are falling apart. You don't ever notice it anymore, but they just, in passing, it just goes by, and you accept it. Yeah, well. The idea, the absolute law, that the complex is consuming and will consume the simple is as simple as that may sound for me to say it. And as much, or as often as some of you can go, yeah, that's true, ain't no doubt, it's just true, I don't even have to argue with it. You still should realize that the weight, the gravity of all ordinary nervous system activity in you and everyone else pulls in such a way that that's not true. It's almost as though it's some kind of science fiction idea I made up, and I can make up examples or point to some kind of make-believe world or play like, hey, if things were such and such, if things were such and such, if circumstances were arranged in this way, then indeed the complex is consuming the simple. Yeah, but, and then everything, even beyond your notice, such as me pointing out the rainfall, it is a constant pull from a one lifetime view, that limited view. It is so slow, it is so parochial, that it denies any possibility that the more complex is going to conquer. It's just not true. And at the old world level, if I didn't make that clear enough, or if you didn't make it clear enough to yourself, at the old level of intelligence, the coda to this idea to old intelligence is, well, I'm going to die. And so, that's enough proof for me. That is, that the simple is going to win. Worms are going to eat me. The only other possibility is based not upon anything that absolutely satisfies the nervous system through the total loop, that is, belief in an afterlife. But of course, life keeps throwing that in so that some people can wrestle with it and seem to float along. But it does not give any kind of assurance to the nervous system, not in all of its parts. And so therefore is why it is called belief, or people feel like there's got to be an afterlife. They feel like this can't be all. Because if they knew, they wouldn't say feel. It would not be called belief. It would not be based on faith. That kind of knowledge has to be inside the self-assured vocabulary of all three talks, the cortical, the limbic, and the motor. If it's not in all three, that's when it's belief. That's when I feel. So people are left with the fact, at the ordinary level, of only speaking or having as their main speech one of the talks. They are left with the fact that I'm going to die. Therefore, the simple is going to win. Death's going to win. Not just physically, little worms and microorganisms, but death. The rich, full life I've led, all the good deeds I've done, all the money, the wealth, everything I've done, I'm just going to die, and I'm going to lay down and I'm going to stink and decay just like a bum in the street, just as though I had dropped out of school and become a drunk. It's just not fair. The simple is going to win. From one view, from that one lifetime view, there is no way out of that. But it's not just limited, it's too slow. It is too blinding, and it will keep you from seeing that the history of man, the destiny of man, is all the same thing. You cannot see beyond your own lifetime. Now you can talk about it theoretically. Life makes people talk about it theoretically. And it comes out in such ways as, well, we have got to clean up the environment. Not just for us, but for our children, for future generations. That, as a matter of fact, is parochial. Believe it or not, it sounds just the opposite. It is not based upon any individual's understanding. Because if it was, then that individual would not be saying, not even be implying that there is a possibility that all this is going to be consumed by the simple. Now life knows what it's doing. Life has people do it and they serve a purpose. I'm not laughing at them. I've never sent you people out and said, hey, go out and laugh at people that say the world's coming to an end. Even those with PhDs that say the greenhouse effect, pollution, nuclear waste. Life needs people attacking that. I can point out the obvious, it should be to you, the simple, is that there is a possibility that life's going to produce too much pollution, too much nuclear waste. And so it has people saying, hey, we got to stop this. The people saying, hey, we got to stop this, the people saying that, wait, we have already, or at least I have, says Dr. So-and-so, compiled enough statistical evidence that leads me almost to the certainty to tell you people that if we do not change our course of action, us as humans, humanity as a whole, within the next 10 years, the greenhouse effect is going to drown us all. I'm telling you that for a fact. The man does not understand anything. Now, he's serving a purpose, but he does not understand anything. If he understood anything, really, in a more complex sense, he would know that that's not true. He would know that somebody needs to be doing that, probably. Of course, I guess in another question I asked you people a long time ago, nobody ever seemed to want to deal with, is once you realize it needs to be done, but it doesn't mean anything, but if you had that understanding, asking a sort of science fiction moving in time question one time, this year as a matter of fact, if this guy understood anything that, wait a minute, if things did go on like this, based upon my one lifetime view, which may be including all the statistical evidence he has, that yeah, we're going to kill ourselves. And then he understood. In some way, I could talk to him. How about that? For a few minutes, and the guy go, oh my God, I wasted my life. Boy, you straightened me out. You know, that sort of thing. If I could do that, then he'd realize, well, wait a minute. Somebody needs to be doing this, and I've already got a reputation. This is really an aside. I was going to ask you, would he say, well, I should keep on doing it until I get somebody to take my place? because it needs to be done. You remember the question I asked you one time? I made up a scenario of somebody moving forward in time, and they realized something bad happened that needed to go back and be undone, and it was supposed to be a certain person do it. Would they spend their time going out looking for the person, or since they're already there and they realize, well, this bad thing that could have happened didn't happen, and so somebody found the guy and sent him back, do I have to go do it? What if nobody else knows it but me? What if I'm the one that's got to do it? Nah, because I don't really want to do it. I got better things to do. So that means, don't it, that life had somebody else do it? Back to the main trail. If the person understood anything, they would understand that the simple is not going to win. But that is probably the most complex thing that we could talk about verbally. To say that if somebody understands that, we're talking about somebody extremely complex. I mean, I look it. And it's not complex in the overall sense. It doesn't mean that they're necessarily educated. It doesn't mean that they know more about the environment, more about greenhouse effect or anthropology. But they know something that all the anthropologists and all the cannibals and all the scientists don't know, and that is that the complex is going to ultimately consume the simple, no matter what happens. Except, of course, I grant you this, that everything changes and the simple begins to win. But that's out of my hands, so don't write me and complain if that happens. You can try. I don't want you to take it without me getting a lot more specific, to just leave and take it as being a kind of metaphorical picture. That is me referring to a one lifetime view. That is not poetic, that is a literal fact. A man's intelligence, his old intelligence, your ordinary intelligence, the highest operations of your nervous system at the city level, at the old level, is tied absolutely to your lifetime. So even though people can apparently, there are people now, there's a whole field known as futurism. The people who apparently, or people who do in the city, they're accepted as being people speculating on the future, trying to predict future trends, etc., etc. Can you see, do you get just a glimpse right quick, that those people, no matter how educated, no matter how entertaining, they may write books, you might read the book, you might enjoy it, or they might be fun to listen to them talk, but everything they're doing is still based on their lifetime intelligence. That's all they can see. Now, if I put it to them in a certain way, they might go, well, wait a minute, that ain't no big deal you're saying. All you're saying is that I'm just taking the information available to me and trying to project the future. So what you're saying is, that's nothing. I'd have to say, well, I guess you're right. And I'd walk around the corner and slap myself for talking to such a man. But it is based upon one lifetime's perception. They cannot get over the fact that they apparently started somewhere. That is, I was finally conscious. I know they said I was born in 1948, but I started remembering things about 1952. So, and based upon actuarial statistics, I'll be dying about 2006. Everything that person, no matter how educated, no matter how fascinating, no matter how charming, everything that person can ever think of, even including, as they call it, the future, is based upon, is limited to the speed, the tempo, the length, the perception of his or her lifetime, and they cannot escape it. And if you cannot escape it, you can't do this. If you can't escape it, you'll never understand anything. Because it has to be freed from that kind of parochial perception. And you cannot theorize about it. It would probably get even more verbally sticky if I talked less specifically, since I threw in tempo, and I pointed out that the intelligence based upon one's single lifetime is too slow. Let me be specific. Everybody likes mathematics. I got another one for you. A new equation. The actual tempo of one's life, the speed, which is what you seem, at ordinary level, it's what you think of as being time, all the way from the speed at which your life seems to move to the lifespan that you feel yourself living right now. All of this is tied to an unknown equation that can be used. First, I'll have to bring up a word that I'm going to put in the equation, is pressure. But I do not mean pressure in a negative sense. I do not mean pressure as it's used perhaps nowadays very often as being the kind of stress brought on by the rat race of contemporary life. The pressure is like, that I mean it right now, ad hocly, for this equation, is simply the muscle tone of being alive. It is the agitation to continue living, to flourish. There is that general pressure. It is a kind of intellectual, in most cases now, the kind of people that would be listening to this, even on tape at other times and other places, it is a kind of atmospheric pressure of an intellectual variety. But it is not this kind of individual stress that, boy, I owe too much and I got too many jobs. It's the stress. It is a kind of healthy, happy stress of being alive. The stress at a very simple level, even though you don't have to, at the cortical loop, part of the loop, remember too, you have to constantly exert enough effort to go against the literal atmospheric pressure and breathe. Because everyone who has just the slightest interest, just modicum of enjoyment periodically of being alive, has got to remember to breathe. You all knew that. So there's that kind of pressure that you got to at least exert yourself to breathe. So taking that, remembering that, the equation is that your time, everyone's time, but we're going to get into you, but time is equal to pressure divided by intelligence, and in your case, new intelligence. But out in the city, this equation is still correct. That is everyone's sense of time at any particular time, that right then, if you grab somebody, if you grabbed yourself, and if I grabbed you and I said, you remember what I've talked about before about everyone has a sensation that their life is moving at a certain, I know most of you want me to say speed, I won't say tempo. And if you don't know enough about music, it's not all that important, but there is a slight difference. You can call it speed, but it's like a rhythm that right now you have some sense. If now you're tired or now you find this boring tonight, your sense of time right this second, this episode of being here, is moving at a certain tempo. Coming over here, if you were late, perhaps the episode of you leaving home to drive over here tonight was operating another one. There is a larger one. You should be able to feel it up until now, that your life has seemed to operate at a certain kind of tempo. Don't worry about some magical term for it. Kind of slow, lethargic, your life seems to have gone too fast, and you might say, well, I took too many drugs when I was a kid. Forget what. Forget trying to look for some kind of reason. But there is a feel of a tempo that encompasses you up until now. And if nothing changes, it'd be your feeling if you're ordinary. And I said, well, do you feel like your life will probably change much? You'd say, no. If I said, well, the kind of speed, the tempo that your life seems to have been running at, pardon the preposition, do you feel as though it's going to change much? And an ordinary person might say, well, probably not, unless I finally do get a hit record. If I do become famous, hey, I believe things will change then. I'll move from living out there at that trailer in Snellville, and I'll hit the fast lane, limos, jets, parties every night, the beautiful people, or in my case, maybe the semi-beautiful people. But the tempo will change. But unless that happens, no, my life probably is just going along like this. I'm kind of accommodated to it. All right, there's that, and then there's at any given instance a feeling that time, your very life, is operating at a certain tempo. There it is. Ordinary people at any given second, if they were bored, here, at their job, stuck in traffic, if they're very excited, and I jumped out and asked them, and I could get in their nervous system, and I said, can you make any sense out of that? They would. I could make them. You should be able to see it. That the sense of time, the tempo at which you're living right then, is that kind of general pressure of being alive that's not necessarily negative. Individually, it certainly may seem so. It's why people complain about the rat race, the stress. But I'm talking about the general pressure. It is that divided by one's intelligence. That's what creates at any given time and over a longer period, that is one ordinary lifetime, your sense, your personal sense of time, not clock time and not life's time, but your time, the tempo at which you're living, is determined by that. This weight that is generalized, this kind of pressure that is generalized on everyone, and is necessary, as I said, is a kind of healthy glow of all the muscles, cortical, limbic, motor. But this kind of pressure that is generalized and necessary is revolutionarily counterproductive. If you're going to do this, you don't need that. Life needs that. Other people are subject to it. But it's as though to do this, this general atmospheric pressure, you got to find out, is kind of like a hovering traveling circus of some kind, or a sideshow, and you find out there's a little rope over here that's kind of got, instead of roping off the performers like it normally would be, it's kind of roped everybody else in, and all you have to do, once you know how, is you just got to squat down for a minute. You don't have to become a squatitarian, but just sort of bend over a little bit and just get under the rope, and you just kind of slip out, and no one will ever notice. That is when you have changed it, because now it is not simply time equals pressure divided by intelligence. Now you're into this version of time equals pressure divided by new intelligence. And we got to turn the tape over. All right, let's abruptly change the subject. Got a softer science law for you instead of the mathematical equation. If I actually change the subject, somebody be sure and make a motion so that I realize that. Once a system is operating efficiently, it appears to be out of control. Once the system is operating efficiently, now I mean efficiently, it's already gone through everything from planning to criticism. It's gone through planning, indecision, internal arguments over whoever seems to be the progenitors of the system. But all the way through good criticism, which remember is necessary for the thing to be completed, for the system to finally be efficient. Got to be good and roundly criticized. Not just by some old soreheads. Not just little Weisenheimers outside the gates. But we're talking about good, firm, middle-class bourgeoisie, if not even expertise, criticism. So, once it's completed, once a system is completed and operating efficiently, at least to 3D eyes, it appears to be now out of control. It appears to have taken on its own life, its own hungers, and its own aims. Now this is true all the way from all sorts of forms of bureaucracy. If we took my squatitarians and told them, listen, you got to quit eating everybody that shows up here. There's a better way. Build yourself a little government here, and everybody that shows up, instead of eat them, tax them. Charge them a tourist tax, a landing fee. And then you can buy whatever you want. You can buy a McDonald's franchise. You don't have to worry about eating all these old skinny, weather, eating anthropologists and missionaries that show up. All the way from creating that kind of system to internal systems. They all seem to be out of control. Before I go to what I hope some of you will see as being the payoff for this, do consider that this is not just, again, something that I made up and put together with an unusual, if not interesting, progression of words. That systems. Think about the systems. Take it the hard way then, or turn it around a little bit. Think about whatever system you consider right now, or that life seems to consider right now, out of control. Well, how about the American bureaucracy in Washington? That's a favorite target, or even local bureaucracies. But the Washington, inside the Beltway, the inefficiency, the graft, you've all heard it. That they could say there is something out of control. That the founding fathers of our great country started out and they believed the government was supposed to serve the people. Now what happened? 30% or 38% of the population work for the government. 30% of everything I make goes to support the government. It's out of control. Don't give me those old sorry examples. The thing is efficient. No? All right. Who's eating who? Who's running who? Who is dancing with whom? Can you make the bureaucracy dance backwards? Is there any danger that you and some of your friends, all of your friends and your family, are going to march up to Washington in some way and confront the bureaucracy? Because we know it exists, like psychology exists, and so anyway, find the bureaucracy and walk up and say, here, here. Listen, I'm an intelligent person, my friends can vouch for that, and they all go, and I want to tell you this thing is out of control. Is there any possibility, not only are you going to do that, but that the bureaucracy is going to go, well, we never thought about it that way. Now that you put it, is that going to happen? It is efficient. It is from a one-lifetime view. It is from that kind of limited view to say that that system is inefficient. Now, I check in on the news periodically. I know probably as much as you do. And that's not new. They were doing it to Rome. The Caesars had to show up and go, look, wait a minute. I know my brother-in-law ain't been doing a good job, but I'll straighten him out. Governments, bureaucracies have been sitting ducks forever. That's just one. Churches, any system has always been accused, but I just picked out, I thought, the easiest one, to say that bureaucracies, the one going on in Washington now, is totally out of control, and I know all the examples. But can you see, get outside your own limited view, can you see that that's not true? Forget that the examples, I'm not saying the examples don't happen, that they don't pay $450 for a toilet seat or whatever that is. But it is efficient. You just don't know what efficient means. Is the thing alive? You got to say, well, God, yeah. That's the problem. It's taking on a life of its own. What'd I tell you? The thing's efficient. No, you'd say, if you're ordinary intelligent, you say, no, it's not efficient, because here's examples where it's not efficient. And I'd have to say, well, by your opinion. And you'd say, well, all right, you have my opinion, but I'm a reasonable person. I'm telling you it's unreasonable for that to happen. Toilet seats, you can buy them for $9.95. They didn't have to pay that much money. You don't understand. The thing now appears to be out of control from one view. And of course, there may be 100,000 people that share that view, but it's still each person's limited one lifetime view to say that this thing is out of control, but they don't understand that that is the prime, outside of one lifetime, living proof that the thing is now operating efficiently. It is now more complex than any of its critics individually. It is, of course, more powerful. But if I was talking to an ordinary person, they wouldn't see any use for me pointing this out. They'd say, well, sure, it's powerful. There are more people. It's bigger than I am and all that. Now, they still don't understand. It is more efficient. If it were not more efficient, it would be dancing backwards. It would be pleading for you for money. It would be the quieter voice. It would be the more simplistic. It would be the weaker. But is it? Well, no, certainly. That's what I'm arguing about. Well, you can argue all you want to. Well, of course, you can't argue all you want to. You can argue all you want to until you die. Which is the limit of your view. I would be telling ordinary intelligence if I were to stoop so low enough to talk to ordinary intelligence. All right, what I referred to as, I was hoping for a Thursday payoff for some of you. One more time, think about it just a second, that all systems, when completed and operating efficiently, appear then to be out of control. Such a system is a man's personality. You thought you were exempt? The entire nervous system loop, from the motor talk, the limbic talk, into the cortical talk. Everything that any human, back in the old world, any human on this planet, what do they call themselves? I, me, my personality, my ego, my spirit. What, I don't care what they call it. It is such a system. Now, do you find any exception to that? Do not all people, to varying degrees, in the same way that you would adjudicate, once I pointed out, varying degrees, you might say, all right, the Washington government is out of control on a scale of 1 to 10, I'd say 10. But you might say there are degrees of this. Now, back in my little hometown where I live, we have a 3-person city council, and I'd say on a scale from 1 to 10 that they'd be out of control maybe a 1. So there are degrees to it. You'd say they're both out of control. They're taking on a life of their own. They tend to, even my little city council, people I know, one of them's my brother-in-law, but they get there and something happens. When people get in power, when people get a position, when somebody gets suddenly a title and a little plaque up there on their desk that says city council member, something happens to them. All they're saying is that the damn thing has now become efficient. But their thing is, it is getting out of control. It is out of control at times. The reason I point the differences is you could say, if you're ordinary intelligence, you could say, well, some people feel like their personality is more out of control than others. Right. That's all I'm getting at. But everyone feels as though their personality, the system that they conceive of as being them, that dialogue that makes up their totality, to varying degrees, is out of control. But they would never, of course, look at it this way because they do not separate themselves at any particular time from both voices. It's like one of the voices is worst ideas I have, wanting to keep making me eat candy, keep making me be lazy. But to varying degrees, everyone considers the system that is them, or they call it a bureaucracy, I, me. There is a feeling that the thing is out of control. They would have never used these terms, but is that not the way it operationally works out? If not, why would anybody try to do anything? Why would anybody try to change? Why does anybody have any complaint about themselves, no matter how large it may be, no matter how small it may be, relatively speaking, to a larger complaint? But the feeling is, there would be no religion were it not for this. There'd be no psychiatry. There'd be no philosophy. There'd be no literature. There'd be no arts. There'd be almost no conversation other than, if you're through with that leg, could I have it from the ankle down? Could you throw that ball over that? That's ours. Other than that you wouldn't have anything else to talk about. Unless there was this feeling that there is a system in me out of control. It seems to, I repeat one more time, nobody would ever come up with saying this to themselves. If they did, and they said out loud, they'd put them away, of course. That the system is out of control. It has taken on its own life. It seems to have now developed its own hungers and its own aims. And that's exactly where I started out, using bureaucracy as an example. That we start out here in our little town, we finally got incorporated, we decided we needed some of the services that the state had, and to do that we had to get the legislature to let us incorporate, and we had to have a referendum. And so now, and of course we got to have somebody to be a liaison between the people and the state to get us some funds here, to get our sewers fixed up, and to plug into some of the power grids. So we elected a 3-person council. One of my brother-in-law. The other 2, I grew up with them. But now the damn thing, we've had a city council. We've been incorporated, been in our own little town here now, Siegfriedville, for 2 years, and my brother-in-law now has started wearing a tie. He wants us to call him Billy Bob instead of Bubba. And sometimes I call him up and he says, can you hold a minute? My other phone's ringing. You know, the whole thing's getting out of control. It's like it just took on a life of its own. Right. And it's like now the city council, instead of working for us, it's like this thing has taken on its own ideas. They now want to do things like they want to put up a big billboard with their picture on it at the outskirts of town saying, welcome to Siegfriedville from your city council members. It's like this thing that was supposed to be working for us, that we all got together and talked about it for years. We voted, we put up money, and this thing was supposed to work for us, but now it's like it has become a monster. It's like now this city council, this bureaucracy, this government has taken on its own life and has now developed its own taste and its own aims. And of course the inference being, at least tacitly, its own aims, its own hungers that have either little or nothing to do with me, from my personal view. Now, see, all of you followed some of that makes sense, even out in the ordinary world. Is that still not a fair description, although you would have never used it, that people have toward their own self, the system that passes for yourself? You would never look at it that way, but is it not true that somewhere it kind of got formed? Because your parents told you were born in 1948, but you don't remember anything up to 51. They showed you pictures, so you're obviously alive, and now you're holding it. They made you hold a newspaper that said 1950. So you were apparently alive then, but you don't remember. So it's like you finally got a government, a bureaucracy, somewhere in there in 1951. That's where your memory starts. That's when you started living as a fully functioning 3-language creature. But since then, if you had ever looked at it this way, is it not like this thing has now taken on kind of its own life? Now, I'm not trying to. Of course, any of you out there should know on tape. I'll repeat it for you. You know, it's not to try and turn you into some schizophreniac, as Freud's brother-in-law used to call it. But if you looked at it from a certain view, if you're hearing this for fairly new times for some of you out there on tape, it is not that you would necessarily look at yourself, anybody, that you're some kind of system out of control. If that was really that bad in the ordinary sense, you would be put away if you're an ordinary person. But it's like some part of you is that kind of system. Everybody can agree to that, because that's the kind of part you won't change. The part that eats too much, the part of me that's too lazy, whatever it is. Look at it that there's at least a part of a system that passes for you, because every time you eat chocolate, if you're an ordinary person, you don't go, wait a minute, this is not me eating chocolate. You eat the chocolate and you go, oh, you savor every drop of it. Oh. You want to make sure how much there is. Is there more? Oh. But then later when you go, oh, I ate too much, or I wasn't going to eat more chocolate, I was going to drop some pounds. All right. Then you would say, all right, there's a part of my system, there's a part of my city council that's out of control, that seems to develop its own taste. That is, you're saying right now, that voice in you, that part of the dialogue right then, later is saying, I don't approve of that. That is not me. I got to stop that. If you had a view from a new area of your own nervous system, outside that one lifetime view, you could see it the whole system. It's just that one of the voices at one time seems to be in conflict with the other, that seems to be criticizing the other one. But the whole system, once you get past that 3-dimensional view, you would see that the whole system, the bureaucracy of me, is out of control. It's developed evidently its own taste, its own hungers, and its own aims, which you're saying are not my aims. They're not my hungers. But remember what I started out with, this law that I told you about, this rule. The only thing you're commenting on, everybody in the planet. The only comment they're actually making is, boy, is my system efficient. If there was a good old God like your mothers and grandmothers used to believe that lived on those great paintings on black velvet from Mexico, that the great old Jehovah someday will come around to you and everybody else and say, the system out of control? And you go, yes, sir. And he'd say, good boy, and just pat you right there on the little head, give you a little slap on the back. You done good, kid, you done good. Oh, God like your mothers and grandmothers used to believe that lived on those great paintings on black velvet from Mexico, that the great old Jehovah someday will come around to you and everybody else and say, the system out of control? And you go, yes, sir. And he'd say, good boy, and just pat you right there on the little head, give you a little slap on the back. You done good, kid, you done good. And then you'd think, good grief. You mean I'm out of control, and now the old guy tells me I done good? You don't understand. When a system is operating efficiently, when it hits efficient, that it's completed, criticism and all, it's completed and it's now operating efficiently to 3D eyes, it then appears to be out of fucking control. In addition to the individual level, without me going into any prolonged examples, can you see what that does to ordinary people's conception, yours and everybody else, about how life is operating? Such as the examples I made of bureaucracy, but constantly in little interpersonal relationships, as they still like to call them on the West Coast. Down in Alabama, I think they're still referred to by their technical name as fist fights. Right. No, don't write me, because I know they do more in Alabama than fight. They get drunk. Because I'm just talking about Alabama and your own nervous system, remember. But what appears to be all sorts of just little interpersonal relationships that may last over a period, apparently, of some time, or they could be just a matter of hours even with people. Just seem to get in some sort of relationship. And that will very soon, if it gets to working efficiently, apparently get out of control. That we started off when we were lovers, we just hit it off the first night. Just within 5 or 10 minutes, it was like, I don't know. Then we fooled around, we were dating a couple of times a week, and then we started we almost didn't even talk about it. We just started dating exclusively, and then, you know, she moved in with me, or I moved in with her. And then, I don't know, they might not say use these terms, but they'll start saying, and then it was like the relationship just got out of control. And I know what they mean. You know what they mean. You probably said it. What you meant was, it was like the relationship was now falling apart, or I don't know, we shouldn't have moved in together. We began to get on each other's nerves. It was like the relationship, we began to bitch all the time, and she got jealous, I got jealous. And I don't know, it was just like the relationship just took on, I don't know, like its own life. That is a three-dimensional, one-person, one-lifetime view, but what you don't see is, from the greater expanded view of life, all you're commenting on is the relationship, from a more complex view, became efficient. You just don't know what an efficient relationship is, like you don't know what an efficient bureaucracy is. You don't know what an efficient personality is. You think, well, an ordinary person was, well, I want to go into analysis perhaps. Let's use that as an example instead of religion. You know, what I want to do is what? Well, I like to bring myself under control. That's what I'd like to do. Have more willpower. Just kind of collect myself. I don't know. I think about wrap it up to say I'd just like to bring myself under control. Well, I'm not on cocaine. You know, bad. It's just a little hobby. I mean, it's nothing really outstanding in my life, but I'm sure analysis could help anybody, because everybody's life is kind of out of control. There are little things you do. So what are they saying without knowing it? Of course, life needs this, or we wouldn't have analysis, and we wouldn't have religion, and etc. And you wouldn't have a grandmother. But what they're saying, in a sense, is I would like for things to operate less efficiently. They don't know that. They're saying I would like to be more simplistic. Contraire. People who have been through analysis, or people who've done analysis, who speak highly of it, they say this is an enriching experience. I'm a much better person. But if indeed there is some personal validity of them saying that analysis helped them, just ordinary analysis, then all they're saying is, I'm more simplistic than I was when I started. Now, on the 3D level, that makes no sense. Or at the 3D level, if you're real sharp, you can say, yeah, that makes sense. It's dumb sense. It's wrong. But it's not wrong. It's not right. It's another piece of the missing, flawed information, because if indeed you could go and talk about yourself, go through regular Freudian analysis, whatever going through it means, go through, and then you and the doctor one day have a breakthrough and he says, you're cured, whatever it was. I don't care what it was. If indeed you were cured in some way, you know what you would have actually happened from a more complex view was you have gone from being more complex to more simple. Except people would say just the opposite. The psychiatrist would say, people outside the profession, social observers, intelligent people, those involved say, no, I'm more complex because for 10 years I talked about my kind of subconscious drives and hungers and the ways in which I was out of control, and by talking to them and by getting down to it, I don't know, I kind of brought myself under control. You became more simple. No, I became more complex because I went through this and you've never done it, and I drug out all these deep dark secrets, all this stuff driving me. I'm a more complex person. This is of no great importance, and it's not me here trying to prove a point to you people, but if you can get past two eyes looking at the 3D world, you can see that there is as much validity, and in fact more so since the other view is considered to be it now, that you have become more simple. But they would say, well, I'm much more efficient. Because used to I had all these kinds of childhood traumas and these unconscious fears and wounds that I've suffered, and these kind of hungers and drives that I wasn't fully conscious of, and they kept me from being efficient. I kept ending up with the wrong sex partner, my marriages would fall apart, I keep taking jobs that I don't really like. But now, I'm more efficient. You're less efficient. You see? It's insane. Of course, in the old world, it's irrelevant, it's impossible, people can't see it, but it's a fact. The very things that people rail against, their own personality, all the way from that to the bureaucracy, they're railing, they're mad, they attack it, and all it's doing is operating efficiently. And they believe it is out of control. That is the benchmark of a system operating efficiently, is if you look at it with ordinary eyes, with ordinary intelligence, and you have any apparent personal interest in it, and you just get close to it perhaps. You may not have to study it greatly, you just may get close enough for it to breathe on you, and you think, well, there's some stuff I need out of this system, or I could use, but I believe this thing's just out of control. You know, it made a misstep somewhere. They got off on the wrong track. The people that set this up, or the people now involved, this thing it's almost a living danger. It's just something that got put together and it's out of control. It's efficient. Besides your personality, I could really be dirty and say, besides your personality, besides bureaucracies and religions, how about just look around you? And then you could say, well, where? Just around. Just around. Yeah, but specifically where? Just anywhere. Just look around, just anywhere. You mean kind of at life? The damn thing is obviously, by and large, out of control. Isn't it? Well, if you don't feel so right now, it's out of control on this basis. It's going to let you die. So it's obviously out of control. It wouldn't let a person of your caliber, even those of you with 38 skulls and only 22 caliber brains, life if it knew what it was doing. If it was under some kind of control, it wouldn't simply raise you up, let you become the complex, intelligent, caring, soulful person that you could potentially be, and then just one day look around and go, yeah, take her out too. Yeah, and him, you know. It's out of control. Who knows what's going to happen? Well, those who only look from one lifetime surely don't know what's going to happen. I think I'll stop with a reprise from the last time we were taping. I'm going to do it again. I started to say a reprise cum exposition, but perhaps I just leave it at a reprise, because I'm not sure all of you even got the gist of it. I did it the way verbally I wanted to. I can do a cheaper version, a more simplistic version, which I may do. I'll try the good one again. Out somewhere outside the city, over in the New Territories, a guy said, how wonderful it is not to want anything. And at that very moment, back in the city, back in the old territories, commenting on the same situation, another guy says, what a horrible thing not to want anything. Small exposition then. At the very moment that this other guy outside over close to the New Territories was saying, what a great thing, what a wonderful thing it is not to want anything, at that very second, back in the city, back in the old country, an intelligent, insightful, educated, caring, sophisticated person, that very second, was saying, what a horrible thing it is not to want anything. Well, I just thought I'd repeat it. I was running low on material tonight, and I was trying to stretch the tape out. So I picked that up. You notice that sometimes on albums, you go to side 2, especially on little short albums, and suddenly it'll say, I cut my baby's hair. And you think, wait a minute, I've seen that before, and you realize that was the opening song on side 1, but here it is, the last cut on side 2, and it says, I'll cut my baby's hair, parentheses, reprise. The same cut, or sometimes they maybe throw in an extra bar or two, or they fade it out quicker, they fade into it. Anyway, I learned my lesson, so I get around the city, so we're about out of tape. Well, I'm trying to stretch it. It was a joke. It was a joke and a joke then. Well, at any rate, that's the only reason I brought it back up. It was either that or have to, again, even when I threatened I wouldn't, is have to go back and do again that the fact that people can't help what they do could certainly serve to debilitate you. So, but I knew you didn't want to hear that one again. So, all right, we're almost out of tape. So, till next time.